welcome to the Inside Britball podcast. Again this week, unfortunately, you're stuck with me on hosting duty. Andy is still off gallivanting somewhere in Northern Ireland, I believe. He will be back next week, so I'm sure you'll all be looking forward to that. But for this week, I'm joined by Stuart and Isaac to cover off the pretty thin slate of things that we have to talk about this week. I would promise that this episode is going to be short, but anyone who's listened to these podcasts before will know that we're not very good at doing short here at Inside Britball. So I won't promise, but we will try. Given we have a lot less things to review than we normally do, I think it probably will be slightly shorter than normal. So without any further waiting around, let's start with the GB game that we had at the weekend. We touched on this last week, but we had the GB women's team kicking off their European Championships with a home game against Finland. I managed to get down to the game. I think, Isaac, you wanted to watch the stream, and Stuart, I know you were there as well. For those who don't know, it was a tight affair, shall we say. It was 0-0 at the end of full time. So we went into overtime because it is a GB fixture. It is a European fixture, and we needed a result for the European champs. So that meant we went into overtime. Each team got a possession from the 25, and it ended up 3-6 to Finland. Stuart, I know you were at the game, so maybe before I give my 2 pennies worth on how I felt the game went, you had the best view in the house probably from up the very top of the stand. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts on the game.
Yeah, ironically, I was operating the scoreboard, so I didn't really have an awful lot to do for most of the game. And also, ironically, we mentioned it might be a short episode. This game was anything but short, wasn't it? So, I mean, to be fair, the first half was, 50 minutes? I think you said it was, Isaac, during the day, simply because of the way that both teams played. So both teams ran the ball a lot. Both teams insisted on continuing to run the ball a lot. And both teams continued to not gain many yards through running the ball a lot. But it made for a quick-paced game, which, we all kind of love and enjoy. We weren't stopping for TV breaks and ad breaks all the time. And we all got to go home a little bit earlier. But it was just unfortunate because we didn't get the explosive plays that we normally see in certainly women's football and small-sided football, where they certainly use the space on the field, whether that was because this was 11s and not the 9s or the 7s that we're used to seeing in this country. Both teams were fairly disciplined inside the box. Both teams wanted to run the ball centrally, so ABC gap, rather than attacking the edges and getting to the perimeters and turning vertically. And funnily enough, when teams started to do that in the third quarter or the fourth quarter and started to use the jet sweeps or the reverses, the field kind of opened up a little bit. And there was we GB converted on a deep pass play, didn't they? Where the QB sort of rolled out and stretched the field. It might have been a little bit of a busted coverage as well, but we started to gain a few bits of yardage, chunk yardage, when we expanded the playbook a little bit. And I think both coaches thought, well, actually, if we keep going with what we're going, we might get some results. That's kind of the definition of insanity, isn't it, really? And I think somebody said it in the group chat, if they keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. Overtime was interesting because it shortened the field. So for those that don't know, our overtime is the same as NCAA. So you start at the 25 and you get your attempts to go in, and then both teams have an opportunity to score. I think it was just unfortunate that GB went first. Finland won the toss, by the way, and elected to go on defense. So they knew what they had to do. And it was just unfortunate that GB ended up getting a field goal rather than the opportunity to punch it in for 6 or 7. And then also during regulation, I thought that both teams left points on the field. Obviously, GB missed 1 field goal and fluffed the opportunity for 2 more with what we termed as a fake field goal, which I joked about being a fairly generous term for fake field goal. They were both just sort of muffed snaps that unfortunately didn't quite make it to the holder to get down securely. So, overall, I think the GB squad will rue missed chances, and I think we saw that in the interview that they did with the BAFA press guys that went out on socials. They were like, okay, yeah, the defense played exceptionally well. It was just missed opportunities, and they referenced a 24-hour rule that they could be upset, but let's focus on it again. And they've got another game in a couple of months' time to put that right. And I think they travel for that game, don't they? I think that's away from home. I can't remember who it's against. Spain. That's it. So yeah, hopefully they'll get back on the practice field, review the film, tweak a couple of things, and it's a fairly strong Spain squad. If I remember, they travelled out to play Spain last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kiwi. They'll look back on this and think we did okay. We could have done a lot better, but I know it was a fairly young, or there was a smattering of young Lions in this squad who perhaps hadn't had too many caps. So yeah, it's one of those learning curves.
I think generally I would agree. I think our defense were exceptional, especially our defensive line, with the fact that Finland constantly ran the ball up the A-gap pretty much the entire game. Mm-hmm. And we saw some big tackles. We saw some big sacks. I think Zoe John got at least one big one, if not a couple of others. I know she played exceptionally well. I think, sadly, when it came to that final, overtime play, unfortunately, and I'm not quite sure what happened, but Finland literally did the same thing. They ran it up the middle and they scored the touchdown. And I don't know if it was tiredness, if it was fatigue, if it was thinking that maybe they're going to try something different. But yeah, unfortunately, they managed to sneak one in. And I actually said to Stuart at the game at halftime that, the way the game was going at halftime was literally someone was going to sneak one in, and that would be all we would, see for the entire game, because both defenses were great. I think there were a lot of rookies, as you mentioned, Stuart, or not rookies, maybe younger players who have been backups to experienced players. We saw a lot of retirements at the end of the last European cycle, and I think there also, I don't know if Ruth Matter has retired or if she's just wasn't available for this fixture, but even at running back, you've got players like Steph Wyatt who have been around for a long time but have been sitting probably in that second or third place, getting some experience, which is going to be really key for us going forward. But I think for me, the struggle that we had on offense, is a little bit of a worry. I'm hoping that we can get something going, because what this has proven is that just constantly running the ball is probably not going to win you a European championship. But we also know that Finland is stiff competition. Isaac, did you have anything extra thoughts? I know that you watched the game and maybe felt all of our frustrations, I think, from what I saw on the group chat anyway.
Yeah, they had the opportunity to put on a really entertaining show, almost being like a curtain raiser for the next couple of weeks of what's to come in the British American football. And it just didn't seem as if that ever got going, really. I think both teams would just had the same exact script of we're just going to do the same thing no matter what. And it works sometimes, but unfortunately it didn't this time. Both sides could have easily scored more points and make it a lot more interesting, but I think it's something to learn from both sides, really, because although Finland won, they didn't come out really glowing. Realistically, a draw would have been more than fair for both sides with how poor it was at times. But no, it's definitely something to learn from both sides, and something they can hopefully learn from and grow with, really.
Yeah, and I think although Spain are always a tough challenge, they've definitely been in a rebuild. We saw, that in the last cycle of European champs. So I think GB will definitely be targeting, a win against Spain, and then on to, the rest of the tournament. Hopefully they can learn from this, and, we can see some of that more explosive offense that we've come to expect from our GB teams. Okay, let's move on then. We did have 2 games in the Prem this week. We had semi-finals to decide who we are going to see at Brit Bowl, not this weekend, but next weekend. So we had Manchester Titans and the Bristol Aztecs, with the Aztecs coming out on top 38-28. And we had London Warriors playing the Coventry Phoenix, and coming out 41-0 victors. So again, we see an all-South Brit Bowl coming our way. Stuart, I'll come to you first. Any surprises here for you? Did you manage to catch any of the Manchester stream? I didn't see any of it myself personally. Obviously, the second game wasn't streamed.
I did. I caught the Titans Bristol game. That was on the Saturday. I'll probably leave that to Isaac to cover as our northern correspondent. I don't want to steal all of his words. I kind of already feel like I've done that for the women's game. But I think the surprise for me was how Coventry held Warriors in the first half. We haven't seen an awful lot of this game. Neither team did much on socials. Neither team have published much afterwards. I know the Warriors have done their customary, okay, we're in the final, let's go dark post, which is perfectly fine if that's the way you operate. Really don't mind that. But yeah, sort of keep yourselves to yourself. I'm sure they're going to train ridiculously hard to make sure that they come out with the same result as they did last year. But full credit to Coventry. They have openly admitted where they're at as a programme. They have openly admitted where they're at after this game and before this game. And I was chatting to a couple of coaches who were at the GB game. And yeah, they are happy, I think, where they're at. To come out as the fourth best team across the adult Premiership, I think is no means feat considering where they are at. Coach Nelly has done an absolutely fantastic job turning that sort of program around since they've moved to Coventry. And I know he's going to continue to build that program into something that contend for the North Division next season, alongside Manchester, who since the game have also come out and said the same similar rhetorical question of not bad for a rebuild season, right? Which they've kind of played down all season, but since the game, that sort of narrative has sort of resurfaced. And to be fair, they are right. Considering what they lost last year, they've continued on the same vein. They've still recruited fairly well, but yeah, they have also done really well, because I think that's a narrower gap to Bristol than it was last year. That's all I'll say, Isaac. Don't worry, you can talk about the actual football. But yeah, we did have somebody who has given us some feedback. So as I've said, I was impressed with how they did in the first quarter. It was only 13-0 at half time, but unfortunately the Warriors returned the opening kickoff for the second half. And that sort of opened the floodgates. And then they added a couple of big run plays. They also scored off, they created a big pass play and then punched it in later on in the third quarter. And at the end of the third, it was 41-0 already. So they also kept a clean sheet in the fourth quarter. Again, whether that's because it's a rolling clock and Warriors wanted to put some guys on to get reps, I don't know. That's not covered in the roundup that we've been given, but you kind of think it might be right with a final ahead of them, where you probably don't think they're going to put most of they're not going to have a huge drop off, because they're a team made up of athletes across the board. But yeah, you just kind of think that they are going to rotate very few times in the final against Bristol in a couple of weekends' time.
Yeah, and I think, not to take anything away from Warriors' performance, right? A 41-0 victory in a semi-final is still a huge achievement and sets them up well going into the Brit Bowl final next week. But I think, as you say, Stuart, the fact that Coventry for 3/4 of the game did exceptionally well, really, is something that they should take way to build on. As you say, London probably rotated. They also probably tried out all those plays in their playbook that they've been developing for Bristol next week that they, didn't get the chance, because let's be fair, because this game wasn't being streamed, there's no footage for anybody to see what any of those other plays that they're maybe keeping for next week So Bristol can't learn from that, right? So they had that opportunity, and I expect a team of Warriors caliber will have taken full advantage of that fact in the fourth quarter. Isaac, on to the other one then, where we saw Manchester fall to the Bristol Aztecs again. It's a repeat of what we saw last year, albeit, as Stuart alluded to, a closer game, maybe. Did you watch it? Did you follow it? What's your thoughts on this one?
So I watched parts of it, mainly towards the back end, and I was quite surprised at how close it was. Only 10 points, but I think Bristol again, like they have done all season, pretty much have just shown the class they've got. We saw at the start of the season the type of players they recruit. Former NFL guys they've got now in their program. It just shows how strong they are, really, and that they'll see this in a couple of weeks' time as another opportunity to London Warriors. And I think that was one of the main motivations, really. That they're tied to them at 22 or some close like that. And now they've got another shot in a couple of weeks' time where they could do it again. And the game itself, it looked like it was tired at times, but I think, like I said, Bristol have just got a little bit too much class for Manchester, and were able to handle them really well.
And we've talked about all season about particularly, this gulf between maybe the north and the south, and we touched on it a little bit off air before when we were talking about Hertfordshire and Cambridge, and if they were in a North Division versus this really tough South Division, would they be looking at promotion, relegation, or sitting in those bottom two slots of the division? It's not one for us to answer, but it's just food for thought. But when you see, again, we have two South teams progressing to the Brit Bowl final for the second year in a row. What do the North teams need to do you think, Isaac, to maybe keep closing that gap on the Southern teams?
I don't know. I think it's always harder for the Northern teams because the market's a lot smaller for quality players. So you look at Bristol and they can tap into the UWE and the Filton market, and then you got London, obviously. There's a huge major city, and I think that's where the Northern teams will always struggle. Because Coventry, you've got Notts that are nearby, but a lot of them are students, and then they'll either go play for Nottingham or from wherever they're from. So that's why I feel like a lot of the Northern teams do struggle. It's just because of they have the ability to recruit as many numbers as they want, but it's the quality in what they're recruiting, and that's why this year, where Bristol and London Warriors have done so well, that the players that they have got and and will get in the future are just always that little bit, I won't say better, but more well known of, more experience, a little bit better quality, and a bit more cleanness than maybe the Northern teams are. That's the only thing I could think of, really, because you look at the coaching in the North, and if it's not the same, it could be a little bit better than the South. So it's just a bit of a conundrum. But no, I'm sure in the next few years we can start seeing it turn back around where the North teams are starting to come back in the Prem final a little bit more.
I think for me as well, it also comes on to, so obviously we saw Manchester for a few years, who did a really, really good job of recruiting well, building a program, really, really working hard on the product. And then they've achieved what they wanted to achieve over a number of years. And then they've kind of gone, the players feel like they've achieved it as well. And they've kind of come to the end of their playing career, and they're retiring. Maybe they're going to have a couple of years out, and then they could go again as coaches. So for me, I think it's an all-round program thing of, okay, let's develop and recruit where we can. EKP have done a really good job. They've got a really stable core of people, but it's now just plugging in the extras. And I think they could compete again next season. And I think the North will be another tough division. Do I think they'll completely bridge the gap to the Southern teams? Remains to be seen, but I'm not entirely sold that they will, simply because of the pool that Isaac's mentioned that the Southern teams have to dip into in the huge city that London is, and then the talent pools that are around Bristol that they can sort of tap into as well. Interestingly, Rushmore Knights posted on their Instagram about the average age of their squad and how most of them were under like 23s or unders. I think their lines were a little bit older. Don't quote me on that, and don't at me if I'm wrong. Offensive and defensive lines tend to be. But I think in the next few years, especially with the Rushmore unders programs, the 19s and the 16s, if they've got graduates, I can see Rushmore sort of pushing the South up again. And then obviously London Blitz had a phenomenal season this year, just couldn't quite get over the line against Bristol in the first game. They did in the second game, mind. So yeah, I think they'll be pushing again next year. So I still think we see South being slightly better than the North next year. But again, we've got like 6 months between Brit Ball and when pre-season starts, so who knows?
And I guess the interesting point there is, all of these teams that we're talking about, and not to take anything away from Manchester, right, who arguably, whether they wanted to admit it or not, probably have been in a rebuild season. But all of these teams have strong foundations across all areas of the game, right? No one more so than probably Manchester, who have a team in pretty much every division that exists, whether that's in contact or in flag. And that's only going to help build the strength of squad and strengthen these teams. So I think, what we're seeing here is, the teams that are doing really well are those teams that have the youth football and the different facets where they're bringing new players through. And as you say, Stuart, we may see that, with the success that the Rushmore youth program has had in recent years, that will continue to build into their senior squad, shall we say. Okay, let's leave that. I think we've talked about that enough. We shall not talk about Brit Bowl because we will have a podcast next week dedicated pretty much exclusively to Brit Bowl. So let's leave that. We did have 2 of our yo-yo games, shall we say? I think that's what we decided we were calling them. We had the... sorry. We're talking about previews now, not reviews. Yeah. This is where I got confused with my notes. Apologies. We have 2 yo-yo games to preview in the upcoming week. So we have the one for the Prem South, where we'll see the Hertfordshire Cheetahs, who finished bottom of Prem South, playing against the Wembley Stallions, who we saw take away that Division 1 South title last week. No, not last week, the week before, I guess. And we have the Division 1, Division 2 game for the North, where we see Sheffield Giants from Division 1 playing the Lancashire Buccaneers from Division 2. Just to mention, for anyone who has missed the previous times we've discussed this, obviously in the Prem North, we have no yo-yo game being played because it's already been confirmed that Nighthawks and Alphas will go directly up to the Prem, with Newcastle getting an automatic relegation due to forfeit. And we were already short a team in the Prem North because of Edinburgh pulling out quite late on into the season. Okay, now that we've got the formalities out of the way, Isaac, I will let you have your pick of these 2 games to cover. I assume you're probably going to pick the North one, if I'm honest, but, I'll give you opportunity to comment on either or both at your leisure.
Yeah, you guessed right. No, I think this Div 1-2 one is going to be really interesting to see. We saw the Leicester Birmingham game, how dominant Leicester were and the amount of points that they scored. So we're really interested to see what the gulf is between the Sheffield Giants and the Lancashire Buccaneers. Maybe a surprise to a few people is that the Lancashire Buccaneers have got to this point, having a face-off against the humble Warhawks, who strolled the North East division, really, and now they're going against Sheffield Giants side that 4 years ago were in the Prem, and it shows what can happen in quite a quick time in football. But no, it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup. I think it could be close. I think these 2 sides are a lot closer than what most people are thinking, but still, it's definitely going to be an interesting one to watch and talk about next week when we're previewing the Brit Bowl.
Yeah, and I think what'll be interesting is to see whether Lancashire kind of go with the trend that we've seen across all the other games so far, is that the Division 2 teams are beating Division 1 teams. We often touch on the kind of closeness between, the bottom of Prem and top of Div 1, and the same when you talk about the bottom of Div 1 and the top of Div 2. Both of those divisions, Div 1 and Div 2, are very hard to get out of, as we know, because there's so much competition for the places to move up. So that will definitely be an interesting one. Stuart, therefore, I will leave you the Hertfordshire-Wembley game to comment on, because I know off air we briefly talked about whether this was a foregone conclusion. Would it be closer? Would it be, I think most people would think that Wembley, given the season that they've had, would probably dominate. But we also know that the South competition in Prem, as we touched on before, is super tough. So what are your thoughts on this one this weekend?
I don't think it's as foregone as people think it will be. As I said off air, I feel that, and you sort of covered earlier on, I think Cambridge and Hertfordshire sort of get the rough end of the stick, being in the same division as the likes of Warriors, Bristol, Blitz. So being honest, they probably look at those games and think, okay, let's take what we can get from it, and then play a round robin against everybody else and really look to compete and take what we can from those games, which, I've seen and heard a few people band around the idea of a national Prem, so it kind of gets rid of this, but I don't think that is feasible just yet. Topic of conversation for another podcast. But yeah, I don't think a national Prem is feasible just yet. And I think this is where the yo-yo games are probably the most beneficial, is between Division 1 and Prem. I think the biggest gulf is between Div 1 and Div 2, but I think that's where you tend to get most of your fluctuation between your squads. Whereas your top end Division 1 teams are more stable, and your Premiership teams kind of depends what the competition is like in your division. So yeah, I don't think this is as clear cut and as dry as people perhaps think it will be. I can't see Wembley putting up the numbers they've put up all season. I still think they're going to score. If Andy was here and gave me an over under of like 35 or 40, I think I'd struggle with that. I think I'd struggle to go over or under on 35, 40. But I think Wembley might just pip it. If I had to come off the fence and take the splinters out, I'd probably say Wembley just about do it. But I don't think it's as clear cut and as dry as some people might think.
Yeah, and let's not, forget the fact that, Hertfordshire are a well-experienced team. This isn't new. Arguably the same for Wembley, who I'm sure will be looking to take their chance, right? These chances to get up to the Premiership don't come around all the time. And I'm sure they're probably ruining the fact that they're not getting an automatic promotion like they would have done previously. And I'm not going to open that can of worms again on this podcast, because we'll be here for the rest of the night. But, they're going to want to really take this opportunity. And if I can say anything about Coach Smart, is that he's going to be coming in all guns blazing to take this. And look, that Wembley run game is immense. I watched the game that they played, what do we call it, Rumble at the Ranch or whatever it was, a couple of weeks ago. And their run game is immense. They have an amazing running back, and they're also going to shout out their amazing fullback, whose name I do not know, but who they send down the gap in front of their running back just about every single play, and he just clears a massive path for them. So, I can imagine that's, what they're going to be looking at. But then again, Hertfordshire probably know that too. So, it's going to be an interesting one for sure. Probably closer, as you say, Stuart, than many people maybe think. Okay, let's leave that one there. I think we have, one tournament with two brackets to cover, shall we say, in the U16s finals this week, happening at Sheffield Hallam University, I believe. First up, we have the U16 Championship. For those who don't know, this was decided at the finals a couple of weeks ago. Unlike in flag, as many of you will have heard of Championship Plate before, it's not all done on one day for U16s. They had their finals north and south to decide. The top 4 went into the championship, 2 from North and 2 from South. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, because this is my new understanding of U16s. And then the 3rd and 4th place of those tournaments then went into the plate, which will be happening on the same day. Okay, so Isaac, this is firmly in your court. This one. U16 championships. We've got EKP, East Kent, Assassins, and Rushmore. Let me know. What are you thinking?
Yeah, first thing, I think this is a new format, Stuart. I think from when I played, I think I remember it was like ranked from whenever you finished in your regular season. So I think this semi-final and then final stuff's quite new. But anyways, you've got that first game there, EKP against Kent. EKP, who've won this so many times, they are just like, at U16 level, they are the team that you don't really want to face. They are just really, really good, basically, on most levels that they play at. You got the Kent Exiles, who I remember watching them once when I was younger and just thinking that their entire program is just fast and in your face and want to get everything going, and they'll go to any side and do that, and I still think that's the same now. You got the Yorkshire Assassins that, to many is quite a surprise that they're here. In the division that they're playing in isn't really the strongest one. And then going to Scotland and beating Edinburgh Napier and Lancashire Buccaneers, it shows what they can be like. And then obviously you got the reigning champions in the Rushmore Knights, and they'll be looking to obviously return the silverware back to Rushmore. But no, this is going to be a tournament where no matter what, it's going to be like fighting between all 4 sides, and it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of surprises get thrown up, much like the U19's finals day, when a team that I don't think any of us thought would win, and the Poole Dolphins went on and won it all. So it's going to be a really, really interesting tournament this weekend.
Maybe instead of stealing your thunder, which is what I would often do in this situation, Stuart, you gave us an interesting fact before we came on air about the records of these teams that we've got in this final. Do you want to maybe share that with the listeners and let us know what you think that means for this finals day?
Yeah, hopefully if my Wi-Fi is working properly and I've put another 20 quid on the Tesco Club card and we're back online, which it looks like I am, but we'll see. So scrolling through the spreadsheets, everybody in the championship was almost unbeaten. The only team to lose a game was Kent, but that was in the group stages. So that was in regular season. I don't have it open in front of me which game they lost and sort of how close. But I think this could be really, really interesting in terms of the finals days. And I think it'll be interesting to see how EE travel and how they get sort of integrated with the sort of the English teams without sort of separating them too much. But yeah, they sort of had a really good outing in the Scotland division, but it'd be interesting to see how when they come up against, I suppose you can kind of classify this as, again with the Assassins. Again, I don't know whether when I dropped off Isaac covered this bit, so I apologise if I'm repeating ourselves. But yeah, with Yorkshire being in a division of 3 as well, it'd be interesting to see how those two teams do when they come up against the likes of Rushmore and Kent, who had full divisions and played against teams fewer times. So probably got more truer results based on who they were facing. So for me, it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a really good day. And also the final for both this and the plate, we are 90% sure are going to be live streamed. So as soon as we hear about links, we'll try and get those shared out to you guys as well.
Amazing. And let's just be, frank about it. We've got 3 teams coming in here unbeaten. And one team that I think you said have only dropped 1 game. Only one team is coming out of this day unbeaten, right? So there's a lot on the line for all of these teams who are coming in with these, huge regular / final season, records to defend. Okay, so we also have U16 plate finals that we mentioned earlier. We have the Lancashire Buccaneers, Oxford Saints, Swindon Storm, and Manchester Titans coming in to play the plate final. Isaac, I'll come to you again first on this one. Maybe more of a mixed bag on this, and particularly some teams here that we mentioned probably we didn't expect to see in this plate championship. What do you think that means for the finals?
Yeah, I think again this is much like the finals where we can really expect the unexpected. You've got two sides in there who've been playing against each other all season in the Lancashire Buccaneers and the Manchester Titans, so they'll know each other really well if they end up playing against each other in the final. And then you've also got like the Oxford Saints, who's done well all year in there. Like they've got quite a tough division from, if memory serves me right, I think is Rushmore in that one, I believe. And then you've also got the Swindon Storm that were quite unlucky in the finals. They went in unbeaten and ended up losing one. So it's going to be another mixed one. A lot of surprises could happen here as well. But no matter what, I think it's still going to show what these programs are about and show how strong these lot really are.
Yeah, and I think, that's why we love finals and we talk about it all the time, chaos and upsets and all of that. That's what we're here for. But, the same is true on the U16s. And as Stuart said, they are streaming the ultimate final of the plate and the championship, we believe. So we will share that when we have any information. Stuart, before we close off on this one, is there any extra thoughts you had? I know you've probably been busy scrolling through spreadsheets in the background to give us some interesting facts.
How did you guess? I was looking back to see who Kent lost to, and they lost in the last game of the season. So they probably knew that they were already sort of in the playoff tournaments, and they lost to Ipswich, which came as a bit of a surprise, to be fair. But yeah, they were probably playing players that they wanted to get reps, knowing that they were already in the playoff tournament and they could probably succeed fairly well in that playoff tournament. That's just a little bit of a fact-finding mission that I did on that one. And then just a little bit more of a behind-the-scenes look at Oxford Saints, who finished 4-4, but 3 of their 4 losses were to Rushmore, who we know what sort of talent they've got on their roster. So, all the other games that Oxford needed to win, they won, except for, again, their last game of the season, which they lost to Solent Seahawks. And again, they only lost that by, oh crikey, I really had to do some quick maths, 5 points in that game. So again, it's probably a similar sort of scenario whereby they knew that they were probably at their sort of Southern finals day. Southern, yes, it's confusing me having Manchester and Lancs in there, but of course it's the plate, this bit, isn't it? So yeah, their Southern finals day. So they knew that they could probably rotate as well, and then getting to this point from the Southern finals day is impressive. So yeah, again, looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing the sort of the cream of the crop rise to these 2 tournaments, and it's all played on Saturday. Unfortunately, I'm busy with work on Saturday, but I'll try and catch the 2 streams at a later date so we can give this full coverage next week as we do a review and then preview of Britball. I think we'll probably do it all in the same podcast. Andy will make the overriding editorial judgment on that because he's back, and I'm sure he'll call shots. But yeah, we'll certainly review this next week in whatever format we do.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, for all of these games this weekend, I think, if there isn't any streams or if you want to share us your insights or information about how they go, please do, because particularly this U16s, apart from being able to watch the finals, the actual finals of both the championship and the plate, we won't get any eyes on what's happening. So, if you want coverage, if you want detailed insight and you want, detailed reviews of your games, then please reach out to us via any of our socials. Send us your insights. Stuart's always happy to receive them and analyze them and share them with the rest of us. So please, if you do, want more coverage, you want shout outs, you want all of those things, then please send us some insights that we can share with the rest of the Britball community. Okay.
Just on that, sorry, Kiwi. Just on that, we did have some people send a few bits and bobs about the Rushmore London Blitz under-19s game.
Okay.
And apparently Rushmore went ahead in that game. I think it was 21-6 or 21-14 at one point. And then as I said on the pod, Rushmore were a little bit depleted. They had a couple of their guys missing. And then what also didn't help is they also had a couple of ejections. I don't know the surroundings on that. I've just sort of heard that, and then obviously seen in the news flash that was sent out by the BAFA disciplinary team. So yeah, that probably didn't help them. And then fair play to London Blitz. They really sort of put their foot on the gas and scored numerous points in the sort of the second half to take that victory. So thank you for those guys that sent that information in. We will cover it off and we will do our best. But yeah, we tend to record Wednesdays. That seems to have been our regular night for the last few weeks. So if you've got any reviews of games that you want to send us, drop it into the Instagram direct message or send it to media@insidebritball.co.uk. We'll have a read of it. We'll get it covered on the podcast and we will respond. We'll sort of thank you, and you don't have to give us players' names. Just give us random stats, random information, and we'll spread the love over whatever discipline that is. 16s, 19s, women's flag, adult contact. Because we've got U17 flag coming up, haven't we, next week as well? I think it starts early September. So yeah, if anybody's got any information on that, send it across, because we're slowly turning our attention to that as well.
Yeah, and I think, that's the big thing is, unfortunately, that we are still a relatively small team and we don't get to all of the games everywhere. So, if you want extra coverage and detailed analysis, then, please share that with us. We're more than happy to receive that type of information, whether it be anonymously, not anonymously, whatever. We're always here to listen to what people have got to give us. So, okay. Did I cover everything? I think I did. I'm notorious for forgetting things, but I think I've got it all this time. Granted, there was quite a small slate of things that I had to remember. Okay, cool. So thank you for everyone who's tuned in. As Stuart said, we will cover the reviews of last week and also have a Brit Bowl preview episode coming next week. So we look forward to doing that. Thank you for listening, watching, and we will catch you again next week.